So welcome back. Last time we had this setup, and I think the only changes I've made between last episode and this episode is I've made the cursor slightly smaller. I think I set it to 2020 instead of I probably can't. I've closed it out, but I made it just a tiny bit smaller, but that's inconsequential essentially. So last time we set up the game data so it would load the scene from an actual file rather than actually hard coding it into the HTML itself, or the HTML in JavaScript itself. We've made it so it loads from just a regular file. Today I want to just make a few amendments to this. So in the core we would have had properties. So we had a few properties so that would not exist in the actual game engine itself, but right now it's detecting it as if these properties belong in the core of the engine itself. So we need to separate that and put it into the user assets essentially. So I'm going to make a properties folder, and I'm going to make a UI folder in here, user interface, and we can keep these two just done. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the properties from here, so controller and the controller 2, I'm going to move it up and I'm going to move it into the properties folder. Now that leaves us with a little bit of a problem, because when we loaded up the core, we took all the data from the core here, the core manifest. Notepad. Nope, we don't need to keep it. So where did it open that core manifest? Here. And we need to look at the properties, and we can see that the user interface exists here. So these are the two core, the basis of what everything is built off of. I actually want to go and keep the names the same. User interfaces. So because of how Windows works, it won't recognize a capital letter change as an actual change to the directory name. So if you change the name first and then rechange it back, it should accept it as a change itself. So if I tried to change this C to a capital C, it would just... okay. Maybe I'm wrong about that then. But I've had cases before where it does not detect it the same, so maybe it was in Linux, maybe. User interface. So to go back in into this folder, now this core 1 and core 2 needs to be removed, but obviously that means now, take the comma off the end, that when it loads, core 1 and core 2 will not exist, which is a bit of a problem. So in the loader we've loaded this load base on this, but what we actually need as well is to make another call. So once it's done all this information, passing information and storing information, we want it to call another function where it does exactly the same thing pretty much as what it was doing here. So it's got to get the data files, and we're actually going to use the scene name from this file. So that information will not exist in our core manifest. So I'm actually going to copy this first. And we've got to go into, it's still in the game client, game data, and core manifest will be at the top. And instead of being core manifest, we're just going to call it manifest. And open it up, and now we have two files. One is core manifest and one is just regular manifest. In the core manifest, we want to get rid of this default starting scene. And in just the regular manifest, we want to get rid of all this excess junk, the core, which is going to already be present in the first file. So user interface, we had control, I think it was underscore control and underscore control 2. We put a comma at the end. We can just check that, and it would be not in core interface, it would be in game data. Game data interface. And it wasn't user interface, it's properties. Just want to check that these two are spelled the same. Property interface. Okay, we didn't. It's fine. We can just keep it as properties. That's just going to be a bit more useful for the user. And it was property underscore control.js and control2.js. So if we go back to the loader, we've got this core loader, so we just want to go game data loader, and if we go back to the game server, we've got the core loader here, which we just want to duplicate, like so, and we just got to change this to game data. Now it's not going to go to the client, it's going to go to game data, and it's not going to be core manifest, it's just going to be manifest. Core manifest, and that should be good enough. I think I don't know if you can throw an error in this version of whatever I built. I think you can. I just want to make sure we can differentiate the two. So /core manifest and core manifest, core/core manifest, and game data/manifest. They've got to be different files. And we can get rid of this extra JSON at the end. Now we need to relaunch the that's not what I wanted to do. I'm going to relaunch the server. I've got to refresh the page and nothing should break. And we should get no errors either. And everything should be good as it is. Now the reason why I've moved it to the game data is because when we use the editor is going to be mainly dealing with the game data side rather than the core. That's just to stop any, or hopefully to stop any issues of reading files and other things. So we need to start working on the editor, which means we can close the game. And I'll just wait until I need to close it. The difference I'm going to make here is I've got config game localhost IP. Now I'm just going to check that I did change over configure game and configure server editor. So the game and the editor exist differently and they use different files. So if we go into node utilities, just check that's 3000 and the editor is 3001. So they shouldn't break each other. And just check on the editor. Node.js server editor, and I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to go into properties 3001 and that's the editor. We can call it local host editor. And we can just change this one to game. So now if I run the editor, I should in theory be able to run both the game and the editor at the same time. And they shouldn't conflict, which also means I can run the game. And the editor should be able to run as well. So that's the editor, practically nothing in it. And the game, which has something in it, which the game seems to be loading funny, so control 2 is not defined, eval. Control 2 is not defined. Check if I reload it, does it go away or does it stay? On 81 of loader. Let's just make sure this works. The script container, underscore control and 2.js. game data properties slash. Well, it exists, so check. I'll do right, so this definitely exists inside the engine. Why is it not loading? Ah, okay, so there's a race condition. So this load base needs to be after the game loads, but it was, because this is like sort of like putting a thread up, it's obviously reading this first, doing that first, and then doing this, which is causing a race condition. And essentially now it should be fine. Okay, not too bad. Now we've got to build our game editor. Now the first one, I wanted to actually change this slightly. So cervical, no, canvas, no, we don't need any of this. So we're going to call it redirect. And what I essentially want to do, I can keep that there, is although all this information exists, we don't want it to exist. We want to make a list of places where this information can redirect itself. So /h1, and we can call redirect page, and we're going to put A, which is anchor, and we're going to give it a href equals, and we don't actually know what the page is called yet that it's going to link to, but we're going to just go /A, and then we're going to call it scene editor. And that should be something that should just load up now. If we go to the game editor, well, that's just the game apparently. Or maybe I did something wrong. Okay, it's mad because there is two of itself. It's trying to listen twice on the same port, so it gets annoyed. So if we just call this 1, we should be able to load the res is not found. You can get rid of this. So now that should load. If I look at the editor server, let's go into the game client. So we need to go to the, we're not even going to go to the editor client. So we're going to do this slightly differently to what we did for the game editor, and the main difference is on the game editor we're not actually going to open we're not going to solely look in the editor, so we need to actually make an adjustment. So we're going to look at the directory slightly higher, so when we actually load into this page we need to put editor client and then we apply it. Page 404 not found. That's possibly because messaging set home is index.html. It shouldn't have converted it back to I'm just going to console.log URL. So that URL is the one that's being requested. So I'm going to just, first of all, I'm going to close all to the left of this. And that's just something we saved from last time. I'm going to get rid of that. And we're just going to reboot it, and we need to reboot the server so it will actually execute the URL. Okay, slash editor client slash. So it should go into editor client, but it didn't request. Oh, because it won't request it because it's not. Okay, so let's just type that in there, and we're going to reverse what we just did with this. I'm going to take that editor client off and just apply it, then launch. Reboot the server. Launch the editor. Yeah, now we've got the scene.redirect. So this scene won't go anywhere right now, but we've got to make a little area for it to actually send us to. So I'm just going to get rid of the. I'm going to keep the server call. I'm just going to get rid of the layer. So where I want to take it to is the scene folder. And I'm just going to copy and paste this in here, and we're just going to call it the scene editor. And we're just going to make a few amendments to the information in this file. So RPG game editor, and we're just going to call it scene. And we're just going to call it scene. And just going to call it redirector, and all it's going to do is going to send it a slash. If I'm right, I think if I just send it a slash, it will just return us to the previous page. It might return us back to the same page we're on, but we can change that. So we've got a few different things, and this now needs to go to slash editor game editor slash scene slash scene.html or scene editor.html. So it's just pointing at this file. So now we can see it's going to game editor. well, not game editor, game client. If I just refresh it, we'll reload the page. So game client / scene. And we can have a look at what it's actually being sent. So game client / scene / scene editor.html. So that should have loaded, but it hasn't. I've just realised I put game in there instead of editor. So I'm just going to change that to editor. And now we've got to the scene page. So this is where we can do all the scene modifications. And that's where we're going to keep all that information. So in the scene editor we don't need to touch the direct page right now. So this index can go. Keep the server editor open. And I just want to temporarily go to the game client and grab some of the structures, so the body specifically, and I'm just going to drag that into the game, but I'm going to put it at the top, and hopefully I can make some little systems underneath it that we can use to edit the system. And if I try and I'll just make sure by putting a button, because HTML can do some weird things that you might not expect, especially if you can't remember how this is set up in CSS. So I'm just going to do test. That's just so it's drawing a UI element to the screen. So something went weird because obviously we didn't take the style from the game. And if we add the style in, it should now look a little more familiar. But you see the test has gone onto the top, which is not where we wanted it to be. We wanted it to be at the bottom. So just trying to think. This is canvases have to be absolute, relative. The F12. Grab a reference of the button, and we can try and it's just because we know what the size is on this scene editor, we could just put in the size of the that's position relative. No, it's for 480, I think it was. So if we just put it to 500, we get a 20% buffer above the test button, and that should do us for now. and we might not want to have a button, so we might put it as just a regular div. There's a better way of doing this, obviously. It's just an editor, so I don't care about the CSS being perfect. It just needs to be functioning. I have made some good looking editors in the past, but if we just put a regular button underneath it, we can just, with no CSS on it, we can see whether or not it has actually moved with the spacer. No, because the space the display probably in lock. It's definitely block. Or is it block inline? I'm just going to try a few different ones, see if any of this works. Get a minimum height of 1 pixel. I'm going to change this to a button, and I'm just going to make the button invisible now, if that's not going to work with me. Right, so that's what's happening. Okay. Let's just play around with this thing. So, it is block. It's already at block, so CSS is really a big pain. I'm sure this layer is position relative, which it needs to be. And because that's absolute, it's allowing things to actually fall inside of them. Unless it's because it's not got a height exactly, which might be the case. For 80 pixels, which is what is the case, obviously. Can get rid of the spacer then. Well, that's a bit annoying. So apparently I didn't put the hashtag there before, so now I'm pretty sure that on the game it's also going to do the exact same thing. Although it shouldn't really affect the game too much because it's all the same system. It's the same setup as this, so I don't really want to go in and change it now because it's going to mean I've got to test the game. I'll just change it now. Let's just run the game quickly and just see everything's still working normally. Right, that's good. So, what is it that I need to do right now? So, so this is going to, because I'm trying to think of this in my head and I've not actually planned anything out, this is going to be a bit trickier than normal, so I'm actually going to change this up a bit. So properties, and I'm just going to move these into here, and user interfaces is going to be in here. And what essentially is going to happen is, going back to that loader in the game, the game is just going to load it all as the same thing essentially. So it's going to go through all the files, then it's going to go through all the properties, and it's going to go through all the user interfaces, and it's going to load every single thing like that, which also means in the editor we can also access everything the same way. So I've got to make sure the game works as well. The game is still running, so let's just quickly go and launch the game. You should be able to see that. Of course, something goes wrong. Just syntax apparently, so it's just this comma here. Hopefully it's just the one comma. 115. No, 2 commas. The good thing about this is once this is done, the editor, you will automatically be writing these files, so you won't have to worry about putting all the commas in the right places and everything. So the game's working again. What I've got to do now is on the game, closed everything. The editor, the scene editor, is now we've got to load all the we've got to create a loader specifically for the editor, which I'm just going to do now. Loader load data, and that's an extend function. No, not extend function, it's going to be a function which refers to essentially going to this game server, the editor server, which I'm going to copy a bit of the editor server from the game server, or the game server to the editor server, which is just that core loader and the game loader. And I'm just going to paste it in here. So now we've got the same systems running, and all I've got to do now is go into this new file, which I'm going to save as in the game editor scene loader. So editor loader.js. So one of the things I should check before I do all this is if I go onto that scene editor, if I add a script in to the top, can I actually load that script in? Slash script. And the source would be, generally it's called server call, and it's in the editor here, server call.js. Choose the whole name. So because of how this works, I need to put also editor client slash server call, and that should load the actual file into file in, if it can be found, which it hasn't found it. Okay, so can I put a dot slash, which should be an off directory. Now we can just test whether that works or not, because it does tell us exactly where it's calling it from, and it does seem to work. So if I do that twice, if I do it in or I can do a dot slash and just put server call, and that'll go up one folder and call the server call in that folder. Just check I save that, which I did, and now we have no errors. It's nice. So what that basically means is whenever we're editing anything in this folder, like adding a JS file, we just need to put the file name in here and it will automatically do it, and we don't need to put the dot. So that should work perfectly. Editor loader, and we're just going to make a brief call to load data after it's made, and in this load data we've obviously got to go server call dot host then we have to put in the tag, which should be call dash manifest, call slash manifest. We send no data to it, and then we got the function with the response, and then we get same thing but for an error response. which we can just type in ERR. Obviously we need to include this into the actual file itself, so we're going to duplicate this line, remove the ... and we're going to put editor loader and the editor loader looks like it has loaded, but it doesn't seem to have called anything, or if it has called something we haven't actually responded to see what it's actually sending back. Which we can just do by putting the res inside the call. Now just make sure I'm not doing something silly or stupid. I'm just going to look at the server call quickly. Make sure it is server call post, which it is. Surprising that I've left that let in there. And it still works. It's pretty baffling. But, event name message callback. That's what I've done. And I'm sure if we go into the editor, we have our call load, call manifest. HTML request has been blocked. That is an interesting response. I've never actually seen it say anything like this before. That's the game server. Let's just launch the editor on its own. Error compute. Okay, so it's because the server call here is calling 3001, which is why it's being annoyed. So as you can see, there's data inside that which contains all the information, the same as before, and all we've got to do is get the data out, go and let data equal JSON dot parse res, and just console log the data, just to remind ourselves what we're working with, even though we can see it in the file. Not valid objects. It's in the data component of it, isn't it? So right, so that needs to boot up in here. So again, we're going to look at what we did in the game engine itself. In the game, the editor client, not the editor, the game client, in the core, in the loader. We're going to just copy this, and we're just going to paste it back in here. So I know it looks like we're copying and pasting a lot of things, and it's because we am copying and pasting a lot of things. But the thing is, these two applications run very similarly. So what ends up happening is we have to imitate both sides of the engine using different systems. So this is taking some part of the game loader, because the editor needs to actually load the game the same way. So we do get duplicate code in this case, which normally is not a good thing. But in this case, because it's two different applications that need to operate the same way, it's allowed. And we can do the same thing with this. The difference being we don't have a load base, so we don't need that. And we don't need the scene name, because this is the scene editor, and the scene name is actually going to be part of the editor itself. So contain is not defined. Okay. We need to go back to the, or we can just create it. So we had a script container in this in the game engine, so we need to have that in the editor as well. We just need the editor to load all the information. Contain is not defined. Okay. If I put it above it, it will actually exist before it's called. Contain is not defined. Around 16. Right, so it wants another reference to the contain itself, which is what it's actually mad about. Start is not defined, because I think I did delete it. I stupidly deleted it from here. So function, and we've seen this before. I might as well just grab it from the game index.html. There we go. Cannot view properties of null at append child. Okay, so let's just copy this just to make sure it is actually the same. Type error, cannot read property of line 18. It's curious. Probably because I had the hashtag at the start of it, you couldn't recognise what it was. So now we should have had a lot of information ask request from this. So what does that request look like? So it's looking for call, but it's looking from the scene. And what I need to do is going to go into the, not the scene editor, but the editor server. And read file, I need to go // game client, which already exists. And I want to make sure this exists on this as well. And here and here. And that's not going to work because it hasn't updated the server. Connection refused. Okay. Now call just found. Okay, what does it try to read? Editor server. Okay. So if I type this here, it should take me straight to it. Which it did not. So and it can't anyway because that doesn't exist. I'll just type I want to the game server, not the editor. Let's try that again. This time, so it does find it. Using that pathway. It just doesn't like to try and read the files using that pathway. Okay. Or I shouldn't have to put it in at all. Because we're not actually requesting the file, we're requesting it from the server, not the client. So okay, so when we're actually adding the source to the actual file, that's what it was moaning about. That's what I was trying to think of, but I couldn't think of what's happening. We need to put // game client. With a plus there, so we need to put this in front of all the datas so it requests the right data. User interface is not defined. See, at least now we've got some gain somewhere, because that means the render text exists as it was written for the game, but user interface is not defined. Okay, So that means that if we look in here, do we see the I'm guessing it would have just shifted it to the body anyway, so where the scripts are, core, and it says the user interface is non-existent. User interface.js. It says core is not defined at 34. So what it's done is loaded all the inputs, and it's doing some weird things as well. So I would need to shut this off as the engine itself, as the editor itself. Which I guess means we could make a core.manifest for the editor, although that is going to be a little bit annoying. Every time we change something in the game client, we'd have to change it in the editor itself, but that should be okay. Editor manifest, so and keep the cursor in here. Inputs can go, and instead of loading, there's the game at the editor server. So on the core load, we won't actually load this, we'd load just the editor manifest. Okay, so it does need to be a relative, so it would just be editor client / scene scenes scene. And now that should function, providing I refresh the server. And now we don't get any of the errors for the missing core and the missing event manager and inputs, so it's great. You'll notice that although you'll notice that it does look like the scene is not defined. Okay. I'm wondering if the code is launching, but it doesn't look like it is right now, so we need to now get a request. That's just something I typed in. So now we need to request the actual scenes themselves, which also means we need to get a list of scenes to actually try out. So I'm going to add a new event called, I'm just going to call it scenes, scene, because that's what part of the system we're using, and I'm going to call it get scenes. And we're going to use something slightly different to this, what we've been using so far. And we're going to go and I actually need to have a look at what some of the tools that we use, using node utilities and file operator. Directory relative is the one that we're going to use. Directory list. List of directories as well as files. List the directory as well as files. Okay, so okay, so this one sends the raw path and one sends the relative path. That's what it means. And the editor server, just edit that to the game server. Okay, so cut this because I've just put this in the wrong file. That's a game server. It should be in the editor server. And the file operator needs to be file directory relative to game client game data / scenes. And now we should just check that's right. Game client, game data, scenes, which is what it says. Call this, and we want to send the data back as the data.files. So what it will do is you can put directories as well here, but we're not using we don't care about the scenes and the directories underneath them. Although we could. In which case we'd use recursive. But we just use this for now. We can change it if we feel it's necessary later. Which it probably will be. But let's just do it now. Game server. I'm just going to send it back with data. So it's got both the directories and the files. So in the loader we've got and then we can do this synchronously with this data because it doesn't actually depend upon it. So or No, we won't do that. We'll do get list of scenes, and that'll be a new function. This just means that we can call it on a button press as well. So if we made a little button on the editor, we can click it and we can examine all the scenes that have been loaded. Or it's like if you copied a scene, change the name of it, you can reload it into the actual editor. Or maybe we'll check if you've left the tab, and if you've left the tab it will reload everything automatically. But that'll be a bit later now. Okay, so res data, we're not doing all this, we just want I'm just going to console log it, the data, just so we can see what we're getting back, and we shouldn't need to do the JSON parse because we're not actually reading it from a file that is a JSON. And obviously we need to reboot the server. And we don't actually call that function, so I'm just going to call it underneath it. Okay, so now we can see there's 0 directories, but there is a file, which is called default, which is the scene that we've been using. So I might just in the edit to scene, just make sure that I is less than data dot files dot length I plus plus data dot files 0 dot split double slash and then dot join with a slash, and I'm just going to do this twice just to make sure, and the same is going to go for the directories. And it's just data I directories now. When we actually get this back, now we should just get gotta reset the server to check that works. I don't want any loose forward slashes or anything like that. Everything. what's wrong now? So JSON.split.i. Okay. Oh, directories. I was checking more indexes than there was indexes to check. So now you can see everything looks pretty normal. And all we want now is to have a list underneath, to generate a list, and when you click on it, it should load the scene itself. Maybe have a confirmation screen saying, are you sure that you want to change the scene? The editor loader. So now we've got this, we don't need a spacer. So I'm going to create a div, which is just going to hold all the information we're going to put next. And this div needs to have an ID that is something like scene list. And if we give it a scene list, and now we can request it in the JavaScript, and we can do nothing with it right now. So we can go for let I equals 0, I is less than resdata.files, dot length I++. Now let's just make a scene button, and we can go document dot create element, and we can just call it button. Now this button, we can go dot inner HTML equals file res dot I, and we could even set a set attribute, just call it data scene name, and we'll just set it to the same thing. Just call it data scene ID. All that means is we can actually just go and grab the get attribute, and we can just get the file name immediately from this, and it doesn't necessarily have to be stored in the inner HTML. Now we've got to append it as a child to the scene list. We're going to just make it, set the button. So now every file that comes through should get added to a little list down here. And there we go. Click it, it does nothing like it should do. And I'm just going to put a little br h3/h3, so header 3, and I'm going to just call it scene list, just so we know what we're working with. And what that basically means is, if we go to the game client and game data and game scenes, if we had multiple scenes that we've made, click enter, and there we can see all of them here. So we might want to change this, the style of it. So put the hashtag scene list, then we go display block. So if you do inline block, it will go across, each block will be represented after it, as long as there's a space free. But if you put it block, it'll be, every item will be on top of each other. Well, that's the theory behind it anyway. Display block. Unless of course you need to put it on the button underneath it. Which it needs to be the button underneath it. Sometimes I assume it should work one way and it works another way, but that was not too bad. That's not too bad at least. But now if we did want to do something with a scene list, for instance, if we get hundreds upon hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scenes, although it's unlikely, we can put a max height of, let's say, 200 pixels, and then we can do overflow auto. What that should do is, we haven't actually got enough files, so let's just change that. So now we've got plenty of files. If we get too many files, we get a little handy scroll, so we don't have to keep so it doesn't make the page bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It will just have a limit, and you've just got a scroll that you can use to access all these. But yeah, of course we only need the one file right now, which is just the default, and if there's nothing there it won't do the scroll, because there isn't enough items for it to scroll. So I'm going to take a break, and when we come back we'll actually make it so we can, when we click this, it will actually load a scene.